What if the INTJ you know at 22 is only a preview? Not the finished version, not even close. Because Jung's original theory and the later MBTI interpretations built from it give us a fascinating way to understand why INTJ development can feel late. They are not necessarily built for an early sense of completion. Their development can feel like it arrives late and restructure everything when they do. Here's the thing most INTJ content gets completely wrong. It treats the struggles of the young INTJ, the social isolation, the frustration, the feeling of being permanently out of sync, as problems to fix. They're not problems. They are phases in a developmental sequence that was always going to take this long. Today, I'm going to walk you through a psychological framework rooted in Jung's ideas and later interpretations of cognitive functions, including the work of Marie-Louise von Franz, that explains why the delay exists, what is actually building underneath the surface, and what the INTJ becomes when all four stages finally click into place. Let's go. In modern MBTI interpretations of Jung's ideas, each type is described through a cognitive functions stack, a pattern of preferred mental processes that can develop and change in emphasis over time. For the INTJ, that stack looks like this. First, Introverted Intuition, dominant in the modern INTJ function model. Second, Extraverted Thinking, auxiliary. Third, Introverted Feeling, tertiary. And fourth, Extraverted Sensing, inferior. The important idea isn't that these functions suddenly switch on at exact ages. It's that different parts of the personality can become more developed and conscious over time. Here is the critical point. These functions don't necessarily feel equally developed at the same time. For many people, development feels more like a gradual progression than four switches turning on at once, which means an INTJ in their early 20s may feel heavily reliant on their strongest, most familiar mental processes, while other parts of their personality are still developing. They're flying a four-engine aircraft on two engines. And the two engines they haven't switched on yet? Those are the ones that make them dangerous. In the modern INTJ model, introverted intuition is described as the dominant preference, and that can help explain why some young INTJs experience the world through patterns, possibilities, and internal models. Think of it as an unconscious pattern synthesizer running permanently in the background, connecting dots across vast data sets, building internal models of how systems work, seeing 5 steps ahead when everyone else sees one. Sound familiar? That kid who just knew things before they could explain why? That's NI. But here's the problem with early introverted intuition. It has almost no empirical database yet. It's a powerful engine with no fuel. The visions are there, but they're ungrounded, abstract, sometimes completely disconnected from how the world actually operates. As they grow older, extraverted thinking can become increasingly important, helping turn those internal models into plans, systems, decisions, and execution. Now the INTJ gains the ability to organize, structure, execute. They become the person with the plan, the person who makes systems out of chaos. But this is also when the young INTJ becomes, honestly, difficult to be around. Rigidly logical, dismissive of emotion, impatient with anything they perceive as inefficiency. Quietly convinced their intellect is the most reliable compass in the room. And they're often right, which makes the arrogance worse. But here's what nobody tells the young INT in this phase. The friction you feel, The isolation, the frustration, the sense that the world operates on rules that make no sense to you. That pressure is not punishment. That pressure is the formation. For some INTJs, the late 20s and beyond can bring a stronger confrontation with questions that pure efficiency cannot answer. Their third function, Introverted Feeling, in the modern function model, becomes a useful lens for understanding that shift. In later function stack interpretations, tertiary development is often described as less stable than the dominant and auxiliary processes. It can feel raw, emotional, sometimes destabilizing. Suddenly, the INTJ, who made every decision based on pure logic, is confronted by questions they cannot calculate. Is this actually what I value? Does my ambition align with who I really am? Am I building someone else's vision or my own? This phase looks like a crisis from the outside. Changing careers, pulling back from relationships, long stretches of introspection. It doesn't have to mean a breakdown. It can become a calibration. The INTJ is installing a moral operating system that will make every future decision more precise, more personally grounded, and far more persuasive. The cold brilliance becomes conviction, and conviction moves people in ways raw logic never could. And then we reach the fourth function, the inferior function, the part of the modern model that can feel least familiar and therefore hardest to integrate. For the INTJ, that function is Extraverted Sensing. Marie-Louise von Franz wrote extensively about the inferior function and its relationship to psychological development. One of the most useful ideas from that tradition is this: the inferior function doesn't have to be treated as a weakness to eliminate. It is a doorway to the unconscious. For an INTJ who is less comfortable with extraverted sensing, the present moment and physical reality can sometimes feel like a vulnerability. Losing track of physical objects, ignoring the body's signals, freezing when forced to adapt to unpredictable, chaotic real-world situations. Under acute stress, sometimes completely hijacked by sensory overload. Von Franz called this knocking your head against reality. But when an INTJ gradually becomes more comfortable with extraverted sensing, often through experience rather than a specific birthday, something important can happen. They stop fighting physical reality and start working with it. The visions that lived entirely in their head begin taking form in the real world. Abstract strategy meets concrete execution. The INTJ becomes present, grounded, charismatic in a way they were never capable of at 22. And critically, introverted intuition now has something it lacked when the person was younger: years of experience. More patterns tested against reality, more mistakes, more evidence, a much better map. That is when the strategic foresight they were always capable of starts landing with real-world accuracy. That is what we can call the INTJ peak-late phenomenon. Not a scientific rule, but a useful way of describing this developmental pattern. Now, before the payoff, I need to name 3 traps that can stall this development. Trap 1. The Ni-Fi loop. This is when the INTJ cuts off from external reality entirely and cycles between abstract visions and internal emotional validation. No output, no testing, just theorizing in a vacuum. The vision grows. Nothing gets built. Trap 2. The SGRIP. Under chronic stress, the inferior function hijacks the system. The INTJ, who thrives on control, suddenly becomes fixated on minor physical details, overwhelmed by sensory input, impulsive, or paranoid about the immediate environment. And Trap 3, the one von Franz found most tragic, the provisional life. The quiet feeling that right now is just a rehearsal. That real life starts later, after the next milestone, after conditions are right. Anyone can lose years to this trap, but it can be especially seductive for a personality that naturally lives so much in future possibilities. The antidote is commitment to something real, to the present, even when it feels like it's closing off possibility. So here is the full picture. The INTJ at 22, brilliant, frustrated, operating on 2 of 4 engines. The INTJ at 35, abstract intuition grounded in real data, logic tempered by genuine values, physical reality no longer a threat, but a tool. They may not feel like they peak early because meaningful development requires time. You cannot rush the build. And if you are an INTJ watching this in your 20s, feeling like you are behind, you are not behind. You are still loading. Drop a comment right now and tell me, which phase do you think you're in? 1, 2, 3, or 4? I read every single one. And if you want to go deeper into Jungian cognitive function theory, the next video is right here. I'll see you in it.